Hi, this is my review of Dungeons and Dragons 3.0 Player's Handbook. Now, this is kind of like a nostalgia review because, well, this book has been out for a while and a lot of people have pointed out the positive and negative things about this book and this particular version of Dungeons and Dragons. So I'll just give you my opinion on my experience with the system in this version and to point out what I consider positive things and flaws. Well, let's start with the physical qualities of the book. The book is actually pretty sturdy. I've been using it for a while, and it has some scratch marks and yeah, it looks some scuff marks and all that, but it's pretty durable compared with some modern RPG books. This is actually pretty tough. It has withstood the test of time. The pages are still all in place, and it's pretty good, pretty solid. The quality of the paper is also pretty good, and the book has some pretty good illustrations detailing different character races and all sorts of things like character classes. So it's actually pretty good in the graphic design department. Now let's talk about and of course the structure of the book. The book itself, it tells you how to play the game, but just from a player's perspective, and there are some things missing in my opinion. And what I mean is, if you're a dungeon master or game master, and you just purchase this book, you will need to buy the dungeon master guide and the monster manual, because this book alone doesn't have all the information you need to play. You always need to. It's almost like a staple with Dungeons and Dragons. You always need to buy the three basic books: the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual. So I think that's a bit of a negative point, because being a Player's Handbook, I think it would have been nice if it had a bit more structure on how the game progresses or moves along. It just gives you all the information you needed to participate as a player, but not as on how you will interact with the environment and the other players, and what you will expect the dungeon master to apply, or how things will proceed and move along in each adventure. Well, to its credit, the book gives you a clear explanation on how to create a character and how to customize your character as you play along. But well, let's talk about the contents of the book itself. And the first chapters are just a barely decent introduction to role-playing games. They don't really explain to you step by step what role-playing is all about, the difference between playing a role and making dice rolls and playing your character class. It just gives you like the basic information. Now, the first chapter, abilities, it tells you all about the different abilities scores, how they will affect different tests and trials during the game. And then you have a chapter 2 about races, and here you start seeing the potential of this system, because considering that each race feels different from the others, you start thinking about how you can use different combinations of classes and races with a particular character that you have decided to play. However, you just see the potential, but you don't see it fully realized. You start thinking that, oh, maybe the half elves feel a bit weak in comparison to humans or elves, and some races feel very a bit underpowered as compared to other races. And you start seeing how some races will be more effective playing certain character classes. So, for example, a half-orc with a superior physical strength is going to be a more effective fighter or barbarian than, say, a halfling or a gnome. And even though the system gives you some tools to apply some customization to play the character you want play or create, mm, some character races are going to be better at certain classes all the time. And about the character classes, here is some of the more controversial things about the book. So you have all these cool character classes such as a sorcerer or the ranger, but some of them, like the fighter, they feel again a bit underpowered as compared to all the cool abilities and benefits by going up the different levels of each class. So, for example, the bard is notoriously underpowered. He's really not that useful in this version, in my opinion. He doesn't have a lot. He doesn't excel as a spellcaster, and as a support character, he's just barely decent. And he's also not really a good combatant as compared to the fighter or even the rogue in certain conditions. So a lot of people tended to avoid that class. And what I was telling you about the fighter, even though the fighter is pretty good in melee, there are so many levels that feel empty. Even though the fighter gets additional bonus feats at different levels, there are many levels that feel just empty, and a bonus feat sometimes doesn't compare with what a new spell or a specialized ability will give your character in terms of gameplay benefits. So, and even if you reach the highest level as a fighter, you felt pretty bland, like you got nothing special out of the class. In contrast, classes like the monk or the sorcerer and wizard had a lot of benefits at higher levels because of the powerful spells and specialized class abilities. The monk was actually pretty cool because of so many unique abilities and special powers such as key strike, diamond body, abundant step, perfect self at 20 and level 20. So you felt really encouraged to play the monk all the way to the end, because you felt like you were really achieving something and getting rewarded for sticking to a single class and getting those cool character powers or abilities. And that's also something that felt really really goofy sometimes with this version of the game, the multi-class system. You could multi-class, in fact it was almost required for you to multi-class if you wanted your character to deal with certain difficult adventures, because there were all these prestige classes later on, as explained on the Dungeon Master's Guide and additional source books. And if you played a single character class, sometimes you didn't feel rewarded. And I think the monk and some other classes were the only ones that felt like really rewarding. Just playing them to the very end, to level 20 and maybe beyond if you use the epic rules. So you ended up with some crazy character combinations like fighter, monk, assassin, sorcerer, and some prestige classes actually had those requirements. If you want to play as a specific prestige class, you had to take all sorts of crazy combinations, and that felt sometimes it felt really ridiculous. So for example, maybe you're fighting against a dragon and that dragon had levels of ranger, and I don't know, it just felt really silly. I just kept picturing this dragon flying in the sky with a bow and arrow, and if you said a dragon that had levels of ranger, that's the only way I could imagine it, as some kind of like Robin Hood half dragon type of creature. So I think it's really got out of hand, or maybe there were these monsters that also had levels in this or that class that actually made no sense at all. How did that monster even train to become a fighter or a cleric if that monster had nothing to do with those themes? It just felt really ridiculous. And then we have the next chapter that has to do with skills. And skills, this is the most crunchy part of the system, or at least part of the things that made it a bit more complicated than it had to be, because they had too many skills for too many separate things. And there were a lot of skills that you could basically group in a single skill called perception. But here in this game you had skills for listening to things or hearing things and seeing things, and you could easily group all that in just a perception. And of course you could argue that, oh, my character is blind, or or he doesn't hear very well. But well, in that case, that character could take a negative penalty to that particular test, and that's it. But here they had a skill for almost every little thing, and it was quite unnecessary sometimes. And then we have a chapter detailing feats, and feats were the coolest part of the system, in my opinion, because it gave you a lot of room to customize your character. So your sorcerer was different from all the other sorcerers, or and maybe your rogue could be a bit more tough and serve more as a melee fighter and not just hiding and searching. However, some of the feats felt really underpowered again, and there were prerequisites for different feats, and sometimes you felt like it wasn't really worth it to take so many feats before another feat that was just decent or not as good as you expected it. And then you have a chapter detailing equipment. Now this is a good chapter, listing all the basic things you would need to fight and to survive in a hostile environment. However, there are some things that I think, there was a bit of a controversy. Suddenly players started asking, but wait a minute, are you saying that my gnome can wield the same two-handed sword that half-orc fighter can wield? That doesn't make any sense. It's a weapon that would be too big for the gnome in comparison. So this chapter raised a lot of controversy and things that were addressed in the 3.5 and Pathfinder versions of the game. But at that time there was no easy answer or clarification for the different questions. And so in the next chapter, combat, this is where the system could be loved or hated for some people, because some people like to play RPGs in a very abstract way, just guesstimating or imagining the fights and not taking into account precise locations of spell effects or the way your character moves. But this system is very tactical. It feels sometimes it feels kind of like a mini war game, in that you have to check line of sight and how your character is moving through different attacks, and maybe your character is moving away from an enemy, and that enemy gets to an attack of opportunity to hit your character before your character moves away. And then you have to consider how your feats are going to work on the battlefield. Maybe you could position yourself in the middle of a huge melee, so you could get advantage of feats such as a cleave and the whirlwind attack. And you have to consider all that, and that made combat really exciting for some people. I personally like tactical or crunchy combat, but some other people really didn't like it. They felt like it was too complicated. And then you have a chapter on adventuring. I think this chapter was just decent, because they could have explained a bit more about how you needed to camp, and one character could stay up, and some characters could take shifts to keep watch and make sure that an enemy didn't attack the camp at night. I think they could have expanded a bit more, but they just give you the basic information on how to survive when you're going into a dungeon or maybe a wilderness adventure. And then you have a chapter detailing magic, and of course another chapter talking about different types of spells. And here's another thing that some would say that this system is a bit broken, is that some spells could be abused, somewhere underpowered, somewhere overpowered. The more infamous examples were the polymorph and the haste spells, and there really were several ways that you could exploit different loose ends or ambiguous things in the rules, so you could unleash some pretty massive damage and effects. So if you didn't have a dungeon master that could think quickly and and try to neutralize those broken aspects of the rules, things could get really, really messy. Oh, and the book, I forgot to mention that the book came with a sample of the character generator. It's just a very basic program to generate a character. And overall, what I think of this book, well, it's so easy to point at so many negative things about it, but we must remember that it's kind of like a pioneer book that served as a cornerstone, or maybe an entire launching platform to create so many games based on the D20 system, and that took advantage of how this particular rule set gave you new ways on how to play Dungeons and Dragons and other games. Now that we have the 3.5 and the Pathfinder versions of this system, it's just really easy to point at the negative things of this book. Because, for example, with Pathfinder, which is my favorite version of these rules, your characters feel really heroic and epic, and with this book they just felt like they just gave you glimpses of what they could have been. But with Pathfinder, they fixed so many things. You didn't have any empty levels anymore. Each character class felt powerful and unique and useful. The bard was no longer avoided. It felt like a character class that could be useful inside and outside of dungeon. And your fighter started getting all these cool things like bravery and weapon and armor training at different degrees. So your character, and he was even rewarded with an ability when the fighter reached level 20. You got really specialized with a type of weapon, and all the character classes felt really rewarding to just sticking to them, and multi-classing was almost tossed out of the window unless you wanted to take a prestige class or you had a very specific character build in mind. So this game is good for what it was at its that time, but I think the 3.5 and Pathfinder versions are much more superior. I think that what alienated a lot of people away from this version is that just a very short time later, like 2 years if I remember correctly, they came out with the 3.5 versions, and a lot of people felt cheated because you purchased the 3 core books and all the different 3.0 supplements and expansions, and suddenly Wizards of the Coast were like, oh, now you have to buy all your books again. You have to buy the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master Guide, and the Monster Manual of version 3.5, and that just felt really unfair because they could have released that as I don't know, as downloadable content, or maybe they could have released just a single volume detailing the different changes made to the core books. Why did they want to make you buy the 3 books again? It just felt really ridiculous, and as if they want to take advantage of you, because it fixed a lot of the things that I mentioned. And later on they came up with Dungeons and Dragons 4.0, and I don't really like it, but I know that a lot of people like it, and you can play whatever you want, but it felt like everything that you have decided to learn and how to play, you had to toss it out of the window. So that alienated a lot of customers, and that's actually something that I think some people that keeps some people from purchasing Dungeons and Dragons 5.0 or Dungeons and Dragons Next, because they're going to be like, oh, what guarantee do we have that Wizards of the Coast is not going to release something like purchase now the new 5.5 version of the core books. I don't think they will do that, but there's still that doubt or question in the air. So, well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.